So most other transportation businesses, when your input costs go up, things like fuel and wages and vehicle costs, stuff that all of us are experiencing, our input costs going up, there's at least the optionality to continue to pass that through to a customer.
Hi, I'm Deborah Lockridge, and that was Spencer Patton. His company, Patton Logistics, was FedEx Ground's largest contractor, and Patton himself was probably its largest critic, until late August when FedEx Ground canceled its contract with Patton Logistics and filed suit against another of his company's route consultant. We're going to take a closer look at this conflict and the larger issues facing contractors like Patton and the many smaller ones working for FedEx Ground, as well as for Amazon and other companies. But first, don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to HDT Talks Trucking on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform.
Time is money, and that's why Catscale built the Weigh My Truck app. Your drivers can complete their entire weigh without ever leaving the cab. They'll see their weights on their mobile device or tablet, and scale tickets can be automatically emailed to you. With a fleet profile, you can save back office time as well. No driver reimbursements. And you'll have access to report data. Find out more at weighmytruck.com.
Today, I'm talking to Chris Brown. He's editor of some of HDT's sister brands that cover other parts of the fleet industry, and he's been following this story. Welcome to HDT Talks Trucking, Chris.
It's great to be here, Deborah.
So, Chris, you attended this FedEx Contractors conference that Spencer Patton's route consultant company put on for delivery contractors, FedEx Ground contractors in August, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was my first time, and it's still a relatively new show. And what was crazy, as I understood, is the show started I think like 4 years ago with a few dozen folks. It has grown to 4,000 people, and it's really mirrors the growth of the FedEx contractors. They call them ISPs, independent service providers. And at the event, there was about half of the universe of 6,000 ISPs were in attendance at the event.
And as I understand, he is or was, I guess, the largest contractor for FedEx Ground. Patton has been in the news for months with some very public comments about FedEx Ground and its contractors. What are some of those things he's been talking about?
Right. Well, I think one of the main things was basically around the high cost of doing business that was a result of the post-pandemic issues around supply chains, and certainly the spike in fuel costs and the spike in labor, and how this has affected these ISPs. They work with FedEx corporate on a contract. Most of those contracts are renewed on a yearly basis. Some are for 2 to 3 years, and those are done individually. Those contracts are negotiated individually. And the contractors themselves were kind of caught with a spike in fuel costs that they were not able to, where FedEx corporate had a fuel surcharge that went to customers. So customers would pay more for the delivery of items, but there was not a percentage of that fuel charge that was passed along to the contractors. And so this was kind of a margin killer for the contractors. And whereas beginning of the pandemic, things were looking good for them from a profitability standpoint, it's really kind of gone south for them. And so Patton has been bringing this fight public with FedEx Ground corporate. Fuel's probably the biggest one, but there's some other contractual stuff too.
I think the first thing that I saw that I noticed in the media in general was Sunday deliveries. That was
There's that
a
too. Yeah,
problem.
I should have mentioned that. Yeah. Well, I mean, just to jump in there on that, the Sunday deliveries is something where they've got to put a lot of resources into Sunday deliveries when it's they have to have drivers that want to work on Sundays. And there was the statement made, or a survey was brought up with how many Americans actually want to work on Sundays. And I believe it was 17% of Americans want to work on Sundays. Well, that kind of shrinks your pool, right?
Right.
As well, it's just it's not as profitable to deliver on Sundays. You're not delivering a full day of packages, but you still have to have the resources to do it.
One of the things that I know you told me he was talking about was this thing he calls Purple Friday. And what is that?
Yeah, Purple Friday is obviously a reference to Black Friday. That's Friday, November 25th this year. And it really obviously signals the beginning of the busiest season for deliveries of anything. He's made the statement that he's already margin sort of negative on his business, and that's going to be exacerbated once Black Friday basically comes, and he won't be able to operate his business under these conditions. And so it's really kind of a not so subtle way to put pressure on FedEx corporate to kind of meet in the middle with some of these demands. He's seems to be walking a bit of a fine line there with making the statement that hashtag Purple Friday is really about what he's going to do with his business. Whether the ISPs follow in his footsteps or not remains to be seen. Obviously, it's a bit of a moot point now. We'll see what happens with Purple Friday, understanding the fact that Patton Logistics is not doing routes for FedEx anymore.
So that Purple Friday. So he was saying that if some of these issues were not addressed by then, he was going to quit doing his, what he was doing, or what was going to happen on Purple Friday.
He was going to stop running, just basically sit down and not run the routes. Now, I don't know contractually. I don't think that is actually I'm almost sure that it's not in the contract that you have any ability to do that. So I think this probably led to obviously him getting terminated on those routes. And apparently, according to FedEx, a contingency is in place already to have those routes satisfied. Once again, is there critical mass in the sense of there's the police blue sick days if they had, stuff like that, other types of actions that would enact change. It's kind of nebulous to understand whether that's really going to happen or not.
So they FedEx Ground canceled Patton Logistics contract, filed a lawsuit against his business that he is doing to help other contractors. From what I understand, Route Consultant and FedEx Ground basically said that he's doing all this so that he can drive business to his company. What's been Patton's response to these, the lawsuit and what FedEx Ground has done?
Yeah, I'm waiting for sort of what the response would be, and I'm not sure what kind of legal action he would want to take here, frankly. I got the impression when I was at this event that he has a really good handle on this market. He has a really good handle on the ISPs. Him driving business to route consultants is the reason why he's doing this. Logically doesn't make a lot of sense, frankly. He already owns the market, and all he's doing is really upsetting a hornet's nest with corporate. But I think that they already come to him regardless. I mean, one thing too at the event, as in terms of leverage, is they were starting an association, which in typical relationships in industries. There is an association. Surprising, there's not one beforehand for this industry, and also a buying collective too, which is kind of old school for a lot of different industries to kind of pull together smaller operators to be able to buy things and get services for better prices.
And this sort of plays out against a lot of larger issues, the whole, e-commerce changes and delivery that we've seen, that growth in the past several years, has to be changing that whole part of the industry. And what are some of those larger issues you're seeing as you cover this?
Well, I mean, like I said, it was everything was really looking good to be in a FedEx ISP or an Amazon side, a DSP, delivery service partner, right when the pandemic started. But now there's just some real issues. I mean, they're fleets, right? They're small fleets, but all they do is deliveries, and so that is their business. They're not florists or plumbers with trucks, right? So these things are super acute for them. It's just hard for them to, if your truck, I was talking to some operators there, and they had, like a wiring harness went out on their van after 30,000 miles, and the truck's down for 3 weeks. I mean, these just make their lives kind of miserable, particularly if they're kind of stuck in contracts. So what this industry does moving forward and how they kind of operate, what their power is to operate collectively, legally, I think that's going to have to be perhaps settled in the courts under some sort of contract law, probably. But these issues are not going away anytime soon.
No, they definitely are not. And, that plays into the whole larger issue of independent contractors that we've seen more on the heavy trucking side. And these contractors have trucks as well. They're doing the more middle mile, as well as that last mile home delivery. And there's just lots going on there. It's going to be interesting to see not only what happens with this particular case, but with the industry in general. Well, Chris, I think that's all we've got time for today. Thanks for joining me to talk about this. Thanks to our listeners and viewers for joining us. And you can learn more about this issue on our website, truckinginfo.com, and as well as coverage from Chris at automotive-fleet.com.